Candidates Forum is presented by a number of groups. They are Downtown Halifax Business Commission, Downtown Dartmouth Business Commission, Halifax Chamber of Commerce, Halifax Collectives Project Citizen, Quinpool Road Main Street District Association, Neptune Theatre, North End Business Association, Planifax, Spring Garden Area Business Association, and the Village on Main Street Dartmouth Community Improvement District. And the business improvement districts that I just mentioned are part of the national network of IDA Canada, which represents over 500 organizations across the country. They manage Canada's business districts and make them vital places in the nation's identity and key centers of economic, cultural, and social growth. Across Canada, downtown organizations are hosting forums like this one with federal candidates to highlight the importance of downtowns and main streets in Canada's national economic prosperity. Now, before we get started with the questions we have for this evening, I'm going to ask Mayor Mike Savage to say a few opening remarks on behalf of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities.
Thank you very much, Norma Lee. Good evening, everybody. What a great looking crowd. Excited to see you out. I love campaign debates when I'm not in them. And I know you all feel the same way. It is a pleasure, and I want to acknowledge, as Norma Lee did, that we are on the traditional and unceded, unsurrendered land of the Mi'kmaq people. And in terms of truth and reconciliation, we have much work to do, and we'll do it together. I just want to offer a few words of welcome to all of you and to our slate of candidates here tonight. And that's what mayors often do. But I also know what it's like to put your name on a ballot. I know how exciting it is to win, and I know how disappointing it is to lose. So, the sting of defeat is tough, but whatever your political stripe, congratulations to our candidates for putting their name on a ballot and standing up for what they believe. A round of applause for our candidates. Now, Bill Karsten, who's a councillor in Woodlawn, Portland Valley, Eastern Passage, would be here. He's the president of the Canadian Federation of Municipalities, which is an awesome thing for a councillor from HRM. As part of that, he's on his way to Vancouver tonight to do some work on behalf of FCM. But we really believe that when it comes to building Canada, you do a lot of it by building cities. Public investments in our city that you know, like the Central Library, Halifax Convention Centre, recreation facilities, transit, cycling, and the Argyle streetscaping just outside our doors have helped buoy business confidence and spur significant private investment. It's no stretch to say that FCM, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities platform, has a great deal in common with the urban agenda released by the National Network of IDA Canada, the International Downtown Association, and the National Urban Strategy supported by the Halifax Chamber of Commerce. Together, it's our expectation that whoever's elected will continue to support investments in infrastructure that underpin the urban economies that increasingly propel the Canadian economy. From transit to energy, affordable housing, rural broadband, investments in arts and culture, governments that invest in our communities invest in real progress. At the same time, we know that we need to work harder and harder to strengthen the social fabric of our communities, making them safer, more resilient, more connected, and welcoming. I think we all know that Hurricane Dorian's visit on September 7th offered a powerful reminder that our infrastructure is increasingly vulnerable to powerful storms and to the unpredictable and undeniable effects of climate change. And Dorian, like many other things, tend to impact those who have the least, the very most. Now, throughout last spring and again last Friday, young people and others have rallied outside our places of government demanding dramatic change on the issue that they know and that our city has declared that we are in a climate emergency. They will be back this Friday, perhaps in greater numbers, looking for all of us to do more and to do it more quickly. They've hard questions that demand real answers from all orders of government and all parties and all candidates seeking election. Halifax is a growing city that is welcoming people from many parts of the world. We welcome immigration here in Halifax. Immigrants have built our city, whether they come with money or nothing but a great desire for their family. They make us better. And there are issues of importance across the country. So I want to thank the business commissions, Downtown Halifax, Downtown Dartmouth, Spring Garden Node, North End Business Association, the Village on Main, and everybody else that's on the stage. I want to thank Neptune. I'll tell you how old I am. I still call this the new Neptune. For hosting this evening. Together you're helping more people become engaged in the issues that not only shape this campaign, but impact our community and across the country. And you know how important this is when you can pull someone like Norma Lee MacLeod out of retirement to come and do this evening for us. Norma Lee, awesome to have you with us. She will moderate the discussion. I know that you're in good hands. Thank you. Merci beaucoup. Well,
Thanks so much. Okay, so just a little bit of housekeeping and some of the ground rules for tonight. This event is going to be videotaped by PlanFax, and it will be posted on the web. It's also being recorded, the audio is being recorded for a podcast, and there will be photography throughout the event as well. There will be no questions allowed from the audience, sorry about that, but we do encourage that you take part in the conversation on social media. And we have some visitors on stage. I'm not sure what's happening, but here we go. Thanks for being here tonight. I'll ask if you can take a seat so we can continue with the forum.
Tell the truth.
Thanks, folks. Now, most of the questions that you are going to hear tonight arise from IDA Canada's One National Voice, and this is a document that identifies 5 priority areas. Neptune Theatre submitted one of the questions, and Emily Miller will be asking 2 questions on behalf of Project Citizen, and those questions were generated from a youth workshop which was just held yesterday. Now, because most of the parties up here tonight are represented by 2 candidates, what we're planning is that candidates from each party will take turns answering the question. Candidates will have 2 minutes to respond, and I did bring my curling stopwatch, so I'll be keeping track. If I say hurry hard, don't worry. If you exceed, there's a big steel beam up there that's going to be lowered. Nah. Okay, so we'll try to keep to time frames. At the end of the evening, each candidate is going to be given another 30 seconds to make what we call their elevator pitch, to articulate why they think they're the best choice to represent their riding. All candidates from each party running in Halifax and Dartmouth-Cole Harbour were invited to this forum. Unfortunately, Christine Saunier of the NDP and Michelle Lindsay of the People's Party of Canada were unable to participate this evening. So I would like now to introduce you to the candidates from Halifax and Dartmouth-Cole Harbour who are with us for the evening. Starting on my immediate left, Bruce Holland, Halifax, the Conservative Party of Canada. Jason Cole, Dartmouth-Cole Harbour, the Conservative Party of Canada. Joanne Roberts, Halifax, Green Party of Canada. Lil MacPherson, Dartmouth-Cole Harbour, Green Party of Canada. Andy Fillmore, Halifax, Liberal Party of Canada. Darren Fisher, Dartmouth-Cole Harbour, Liberal Party of Canada. And finally, Emma Norton, Dartmouth-Cole Harbour, New Democratic Party. All right, so let's get things started, and we will rotate the order of who gets the questions first. I'll keep track of that as well as the time. So this question will go to each of the candidates. So to start it off, Bruce Holland, tell us what inspired you to run for office and what you hope to be able to bring to the table in terms of being able to represent this riding.
Thank you, Normalie, and thank you everybody for being here tonight. What inspired me is just my love of volunteerism and service to my party, to my country, and to Halifax. I've spent my whole life in some sort of service, whether it was the local fire hall, my church, more recently, Long Lake Provincial Park, sitting on boards and committees and just developing things, throughout my life, and I really enjoy it, and I look forward to doing it, continuing to do it. I sit on the Leading with Transit committee right now, and been doing that for a couple of years. We have some really good ideas around transit for the city, and I look forward to espousing those tonight.
Great, thank you. Jason Cole.
Thanks for everyone coming. It's been, this is a cool ride, getting involved in politics, getting to meet thousands of people. Yeah, you get the odd person that is not happy with you, but you know what? We have all part to play into making sure that everybody is treated with dignity and respect. If we want to see that in the highest office in the land, it starts right here. And I appreciate everybody so far as we have this going. But why I got into politics is, sometimes you just can't sit by the sidelines any longer. I grew up in a construction firm, and with that I bid on tenders and worked with government agencies to do different projects, and saw where there's efficiencies and inefficiencies. So I was able to see, working with different departments, to see what is good government and what is not so good government. And I think we can do government better, and I think we can provide services better than we currently are. I grew up an atheist, as many of you probably don't know, but I'm now a church pastor. I've been a pastor for 14 years, and I've been on the ground helping the people that fall through the cracks. In church, I've been able to see those that our system is not able to help. We have filled people's prescriptions for them and paid for it. We've put oil in people's tanks. We've been on the front line of helping people, and I just, you know what? I'll continue to do that the rest of my life, but I believe that there's some structures that we can change and make sure that everybody gets ahead in this country.
Thank you. Joanne Roberts.
Well, I became a journalist in the age of Woodward and Bernstein. When journalists were holding politicians to account and bringing down governments. And I thought at the time, because I was interested in politics, that actually what we needed for a better democracy was smart, well-trained journalists that would do just that would hold those in power to account. So I had a great career, got to do that, questioning politicians, searching for answers, telling the stories of those who often didn't have a voice, weren't being heard. But what inspired me then to change that, to give up that career and decide to get into politics? Well, it was exactly the reason I got into journalism. I felt the balance of power had shifted, and that we needed more politicians who were well-trained and smart and willing to have a variety of voices in our House of Commons and in our legislatures that would hold the parties in power to account. So I saw the balance in democracy shifting, and I thought I had to do something about it. I also wanted to follow what the scientists were saying and help fight climate change, and I saw the two major parties in the country not doing that, so I decided to give up my job and run for the Green Party of Canada. I also want to be able to look in the eyes of my two grandchildren and tell them I did what I could to fight for their future. So I do feel I have the skills to be an effective MP. I'm smart, caring, and compassionate. I'm a good listener. And I look at what Elizabeth May has done as one voice in the House of Commons. I wonder if I could do what one MP from the West, if I could be that MP from the East that says loud and clear that the Deputy Leader of the Green Party of Canada believes that we on the East Coast need action on climate change. Thank you.
Bill MacPherson. Thank you. Give a timer. 100% climate change is my driving force, and the youth. About 15 years ago, I was driven to open a business because of a climate change hurricane that hit Nova Scotia 15 years ago, Hurricane Juan. And it rocked my world, and I got really scared about food security in Nova Scotia. We're almost an island, but up north with climate change brewing in, it really scared me. So that really set me in motion, and I took a risk and I opened the restaurant. Everybody thought it wasn't possible and it wouldn't work, but it did, 15 years later. And now that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the targets came out that were quite daunting, that we have less than 10 years.
my whole life's been dedicated really to change. I'm in environmental groups and boards and activists and trying the best I can to make change, but it just didn't seem enough. And when that report came out, that scared me to death. And I thought, you know what, I'm not a politician, but I'm gonna learn. And I'm gonna work hard, and I'm a good, honest person, and I grew up in Dartmouth-Cole, Harbour, and I'm completely driven by the youth. So I decided to take the leap of faith again, and climate change is driving my ship. I have no choice. I have to run. It is in my gut and in my heart, deeply. So this is not a column. I don't need a retirement plan. I don't need to, another job. I have one. So I really want to go for this, and I'm really hoping you'll choose me, and I'll get up to Ottawa and roll up our sleeves and get to work. Thank you.
Andy Fillmore.
Thanks, Normalie. You know, the world is changing and we need to change with it. Enacting change, whether it's on climate change or on poverty action, is about rolling up your sleeves. It's about taking the risks in the pursuit of your vision. It involves listening and compromise. And at the end of the day, it's about getting results, tangible, measurable results. And that's what I've done over the course of my career, first as a city planner and then as MP for Halifax. Working on the ground, on the front lines, making my hometown, our city, a better place. Today in Halifax, cranes dot the skyline after decades of stagnation, thanks in part to my work as the first manager of urban design for the city, helping to unlock the potential of our city that we see all around us today. Did you know that over half of all of our residential growth in HRM is now directed to the urban core? Before this work that I was involved with at the city, only about 17% of housing was being directed to the urban core. Just imagine the farms and the forests that have been saved from low density subdivisions, the air saved from the pollution and emissions of long commutes. And today in Halifax, low income single moms have more money to feed their kids, more money to buy school supplies, maybe more money to put their daughters in hockey because of our Canada Child Benefit. Today in Halifax, a shipbuilder who just graduated from NSCC will have a lifetime of work because we stepped up where the Conservatives failed and secured shipbuilding jobs, 3,000 of them for 30 years, once and for all. And soon in Halifax, a new generation of Haligonians will learn to swim or run track at a new YMCA, just like I did, because we funded it. And soon in Halifax, a cyclist, maybe one who's never ridden a bike in the downtown before, will be able to bike to work or school, back home again, safe and sound, on over 30 kilometers of bike lanes that we've helped to fund at a time when some were arguing for more roads and highways. This is what enacting positive, tangible change looks like.
Thank you.
It's about moving us forward in small and big ways every single day, making lives better.
Thank you very much. Darren Fisher.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. I wish I could see all of you. There's so much bright light up here. You know, I've always believed in my community. When I was elected before I was elected in 2015, I'd hear about our young people that were educated at NSCC and at our wonderful universities. We had to send those folks, those young people, down the road to Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver, the US. That's where they had to go to get work. We offered them great training, but we didn't offer them a future here in Nova Scotia. I believe that increased strategic federal investments produce the type of economic opportunities that give our young people the ability to finally stay here. We need to focus on building good, clean infrastructure, on taking care of our environment, and fighting climate change. We need to recognize that building an inclusive, healthy, successful community means lifting everyone up with us as we grow and prosper. When I was little, I rolled around the floors of my grandmother's store on Portland Street in downtown Dartmouth. It was called Fisher Stationery. She was one of the first women entrepreneurs in downtown Dartmouth in 1959. And for the next 53 years, she worked at the same cash register, at the same counter in that little store. That little store was a place that I got a chance to see how you treated people, how you showed respect for people. I got to hear for decades the stories about Dartmouth, about Cole Harbour, about our community and how great it was, how vibrant it was. The streets were packed, the stores were full, People were happy. And then we saw several years where the stores in downtown Dartmouth, the stores in Cole Harbour, were papered up. We saw the malls succeed, but we saw our downtown and our commercial areas struggle. I gotta tell you, my grandmother in 2014, she said, Dartmouth will be back, and it'll be bigger than ever. And I will tell you, you walk downtown and you go see places like Lake City Cider, you go see the canteen, you go see some of the, we've got people coming over in ferry boats full of people from Halifax to go to Dartmouth for the first time in 30 or 40 years.
And I'm going to have to leave it there.
We will accept all the Haligonians we can take over Dartmouth because we have amazing business. We have amazing entrepreneurs, many of them women, doing very, very cool things in Dartmouth-Cole Harbour.
All right, thank you. Emma Norton.
Good evening, everyone. Bonjour, je m'appelle Maggie. My name is Emma Norton, and I am your NDP candidate for Dartmouth-Cole Harbour. I've been a climate activist for the past 11 years, and I've worked at an environmental charity for the past 7 years on energy issues related to energy conservation, specifically in community work and policy work like regulatory systems and building codes. I am a young person who has been let down by several of our political leaders, and I am deeply connected to the grassroots, and I've experienced some policy development. I am also a fighter. We face many urgent crises that, when appropriately addressed, will make everyone's lives better and build an economy that is sustainable and works for all of us. People have been sold the lie that there isn't enough to go around. There isn't enough jobs, there isn't enough money, there isn't enough time. But that's just not true. There could be enough if we shared the wealth, and there could be more than enough if we changed our priorities. Here is what I see. I see a future where we have thwarted the worst of the climate crisis and live better quality lives than we do now. I see a future where everyone breathes clean air and everyone drinks clean water. I see a future where every person has a roof over their head and has access to good food and quality health care, including medications. I see a future where our nation's government recognizes the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and we live in harmony and respect with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. And I see a future where we can wear whatever our religious or cultural beliefs entail and face no discrimination. I see a future where the people of Dartmouth-Cole Harbour have a thriving community with convenient public transit, quality, efficient housing, access to affordable food, publicly funded, reliable health care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So as I mentioned at the outset, we're going to rotate which party gets the question first. So the next question, we'll start with the Green Party representatives. You can choose who's going to answer. And the question is this: a national housing strategy was recently launched at the federal level. However, from a local Halifax-Dartmouth context, there continues to be an affordable housing crisis. What part do you see the federal government playing in tackling the affordable housing crisis here?
I'll take that. We want to legislate housing as a legal, protective, fundamental human right for all Canadians and permanent residents first. Appoint a Minister of Housing to strengthen the national housing strategy so that it meets the needs for affordable housing that are unique to each province, and to see that it gets done collaborating with provincial ministers. This recognizes that housing is a provincial jurisdiction. The target would be 25,000 new and 15,000 renovated units annually for the next 10 years. Increase the National Housing Co-Investment Fund by $750 million for new builds, and the Canada Housing Benefit for $750 million for rent assistance for 125,000 households. Now I want to remind you guys all that affordable housing is not just for the poor. It's for the working class, a married couple, 2 graduating students, restaurant workers, I've been there, hotel workers, nurses, caregivers. We have to change the conversation. This is the people that make our city run for affordable housing. Thank you.
Same question to our Liberal candidates. What part do you see the federal government playing to tackle the affordable housing crisis?
Thank you very much, Norma. Everyone deserves a safe and affordable place to call home. As our municipality grows more successful and more popular, high rent costs come with it. And we know that this is becoming a huge problem. And all orders of government have a role to play in solving this. When we were elected in 2015, we made sure that the federal government had an active role in tackling the issue of affordable housing. Early on, we introduced the National Housing Strategy, and it's helped more than 1 million Canadians find a place to call home through new builds, renos, and rental subsidies. And we have incentives available to encourage the development of more affordable rental units. In total, we're talking over $7 billion in housing investments. Our government introduced for the first time in Canada legislation that recognizes the rights of Canadians to access adequate housing. And the legislation also requires all future governments to maintain a national housing strategy. So it can't be dropped if another government comes in. Of course, it's up to, as I said, all orders of government to tackle this issue, whether the province or the municipalities want to bring in rent control or other potential solutions. But we announced through the National Housing Strategy that starting in 2020, to offset rental costs, we'll introduce a new Canada Housing Benefit to help more folks afford to pay their rent. It took a while, but the province came to the table and signed the bilateral agreement so we could finally deliver federal funding to housing in Nova Scotia. That happened, I think, sometime late in August. And for the record, I do believe in increasing the National Housing Strategy until we've handled this issue to the very best of our ability in Canada. I believe this agreement, the National Housing Strategy, and our other measures to tackle poverty will help the constituents of Dartmouth-Cole Harbour and folks all across Nova Scotia to have a safe place to call home with the security to know that they can afford to live.
The same question to the New Democratic Party representative here tonight, Emma. What part do you see the federal government playing to tackle the affordable housing crisis?
Well, crisis is the right word. The federal government cannot afford to not play a role. Most of my friends, and since everyone's too polite to ask, I'm 29, most of my friends can't afford houses. I'm talking to renters who want to buy a home, but they can't. And apartment availability is getting harder and harder. Vacancy rates are lower than we've seen in years. People are very frustrated. I'm frustrated. And the lucky ones are borrowing from their parents for their down payments. But this market isn't sustainable. The Liberals promised affordable housing and then turned around and killed the NDP housing crisis motion. Bill 889, Housing as a Human Right, would have backed up the Liberals' words. And I know that you're claiming that you've helped to build more than 1 million Canadians to find a home, but that's been thoroughly debunked by the analysts. We can also look at the local situation. Rent in Halifax is higher than the national average, and we have one of the highest proportions of renters paying 50% of their income for housing. In Dartmouth North and Dartmouth South, there is a higher percentage of people living in housing insecurity than the HRM average. The NDP has a plan to build 500,000 affordable units across this country in the next 10 years. We would eliminate the HST on the building of affordable homes to incentivize contractors, and that would bring federal contracts to Dartmouth that will support our local business scene.
Taking this one?
Yes. This is a real problem that is near and dear to me. My home and my church have been a revolving door for those who can't afford to live on their own for quite some time. This is a real problem. We even have a sister church of ours, Frank McKayos, that has opened up to allow people just to come in and stay for the night so they're not on the street. And I met one gentleman who was in there, and he goes, I have a job. He just can't afford it anywhere. And so he tries to chip in to try to keep the place going. We do believe that the federal government has an important role in this. One is to have a national body, not to govern per se, but to see who's doing it well. That's the wonderful thing about having multiple countries do different things and then multiple municipalities doing different things to tackle the same problem. So if we can say, hey, you know what, Cape Breton's really doing a good job at this. Maybe we should adopt that. And it's good to have each municipality do their own thing, but then also have those results go up so that we
look at them all and see who's winning and who's really doing this good and efficient and respecting the taxpayer along the way while we honor people to put them in an affordable home. And so I look forward to seeing that and to try to spearhead something of that nature. Second thing, it doesn't help when we increase the cost of life through taxes and other deductions off your paycheck. We believe that we need to stop that. We need to stop charging you GST for your home heating. That just makes it even that much more affordable. We need to lower your taxes overall because, again, the working poor are having giant chunks of their paycheck taken, and I just simply think that we can do better with less. And finally, because I don't really have time, I could talk all day on this one. And the federal government owns lots of land near and around all kinds of cities. And so with that, we have the opportunity to use federal lands to open up for more development. And we all know that increasing supply reduces costs. And so we want to see municipalities make sure they're increasing the supply and making sure that their approval processes are timely and are not taking forever. It took over a decade for them to approve the King's Tower Wharf down there. I know those aren't affordable housing, but just an example of showing of how hard it is for developers to actually do jobs. We should get out of their way. We should have a streamlined process so that they increase supply. Because you know what? We're bringing in hundreds of thousands of immigrants, and I love that. But that means we got to be building hundreds of thousands of residences as well for them and for those who are less fortunate with our own borders.
All right, our next question picks up on one of the points you raised, and that is available land. The cost of land is a big impediment to private developers building affordable housing in an urban area. And any surplus federal land is disposed of by the Canada Lands Corporation. And some examples in the urban core would be the Ralston building, which is the former home of the Canada Revenue Agency. They moved out to a business park recently. There's the former RCMP building and, of course, Shannon Park. So the next question is, should Canada Lands Corporation be permitted to use surplus lands as affording housing developments? And that question first goes to the Liberal candidates.
Thank you. My turn again. As some of you probably know, Canada Lands is an arm's-length government agency, but they do have programs to transition surplus lands for affordable housing developments now. The Federal Lands Initiative supports the transfer of surplus federal lands and buildings to eligible proponents either at no cost or at a deep discount. So it can be renovated or developed for affordable housing. We have an example of that right now on Maitland Street in Halifax that is open to applications right now. I think the federal government needs to look at all projects, every project, through a greater socioeconomic lens to ensure that even our arm's length Crown's corporations, like Canada Lands, are ensuring that all developments have an affordable housing component. We've reached a point where affordable housing needs to be part of the plan from the start, right from the beginning of all the planning processes. I think we could even further empower Canada Lands to be able to identify the right properties for affordable housing developments, to follow the lead of our municipality here in Halifax and transfer more properties, either by increasing the Federal Lands Initiative or by passing legislation to adjust their mandate, adjust Canada Lands' mandate to take into account more of the socioeconomic impacts of projects. They already look at value to the community, but specifically, perhaps we can strengthen their mandate to push for stronger affordable housing components as part of the value to the community and to Canadian taxpayers. The Shannon Park development started before I was elected in 2015. However, a project like that absolutely has to include mixed-use properties and affordable housing as a priority. We need to build complete communities.
Thank you. All right, the same question to Emma Norton, representing the NDP tonight. Should the rules change? Should Canada Lands Corporation be using their surplus land for affordable housing?
So the prospects for Shannon Park are very exciting, and I would welcome a mixed housing project as long as it includes affordable housing and is done in true consultation with the Mi'kmaq people. Thank you. Thank you. I do not support the bid to use it as a stadium. We are in a housing crisis in HRM, and we need to focus on housing people first.
Thank you. To the Conservative candidates, that was very concise. Thank you.
Thank you. I tried.
Very well put. My answer to that is yes, definitely. You know, one of the problems, I think one of the candidates just mentioned it earlier, you know, 4 years in office, and on the eve of an election, they're finally coming to an agreement on affordable housing with the province. Well, you know, so that means that nothing's been done for the last 4 years. And it's not just this current government. You know, that has not really been an issue for a lot of governments for a lot of years. Since the amalgamation of the, you know, when we became HRM, before that, the municipalities looked after affordable housing. And then when we did the amalgamation, that was one of the things that got shifted over to the province to do. And they shifted some other responsibilities to the municipalities. But that housing piece, I don't think there was an affordable housing development done since that amalgamation. I could be wrong, but they're very few and far between. The ones that I know of are primarily co-ops and Habitat for Humanity. So, you know, it's a big, big problem that we need to solve. And I think as an MP, that you need to get right down there with the province, with the municipalities, and work with them to make sure that it's solved. It's not enough to say, oh, we gave $22 billion towards, you know, nonprofit or affordable housing. I don't think there's one been built here in Halifax or even in Nova Scotia. But that's for me, yes, by all means, use buildings, excess buildings. That's a great way to start. And that's my answer to it. Thanks, Norman.
Thank you. Same question to the Green Party candidates.
Absolutely, yes. We face a national shortage of affordable housing, a growing problem of homelessness and home insecurity. I've been to the Frank McKay House, so I see it, especially in Dartmouth. The LCU uses a community consultant process for appropriate plan for the property, which I really like. So why not access it? For sure. It's affordable, quality housing for low-income families, seniors, and persons with disabilities. I want to tell you about a model, a success model that we could pick up in Canada. The Garrison Crossings is one of the Chilliwack, British Columbia's most innovative communities. The site is a 153-acre redevelopment of a part of a former Canadian Force bases, Chilliwack. Kind of reminds me of Shannon Park, absolutely. But in Shannon Park, we get to really have fun and design as we can because we have a blank canvas. So imagine the opportunity we could have. Garrison Crossing will, when completed, include over 1,700 residential housing units with a mix of new and refurbished single-family homes, new and restored townhouses, condominium apartments, and its own retail village. I love that. The Garrison Crossing celebrates its surroundings and commemorates its history. This approach has made the community one of the most desirable residential neighborhoods in the entire Fraser Valley. I think of the football stadium versus affordable housing. Are you kidding me? There's no question whatsoever. This is really, really important issue that we have to tackle, and I am totally against the football stadium. And what an opportunity we would miss to make this an amazing, world-class sustainable village down there. So,
thank you. Thanks. There is time for rebuttal. If anyone wants to rebut something that has been said, Andy is raising his hand. What would you like to respond to?
Thanks, Normally. I just wanted to talk about the National Housing Strategy and its impact already in Nova Scotia. With respect, Bruce, we have an incredible impact already. Already $25 million has come to Nova Scotia. We've invested $5 million in Mulgrave Park to repair retaining walls and heating systems. In partnership with the Mi'kmaq Native Friendship Center, we've built 4 units of housing for mothers and their children escaping domestic violence. We've established an $11 million green infrastructure fund in Nova Scotia for improvements to more than 100 public housing structures, in 51 communities across the province. That's all before we signed the bilateral agreement at the end of August. And now we have a 10-year, $395 million agreement with the province of Nova Scotia, about 3 weeks old, that's going to really let the National Housing Strategy. And in 2020, here comes the Canada Housing Benefit, up to $200 a month to defray rent costs for those most in need.
All right. Two candidates mentioned the stadium. Would anyone else like to weigh in with the position? I'm not going to force anyone.
I think I'm against. I don't think we need a stadium. Not at this juncture. We need so much other things in this city and in this province that are so much more important than a football stadium. If the football stadium, private entities want to do that, let them do it, but not at the expense of doing other things. And Andy mentions a whole lot of maintenance that was probably well overdue on public housing, which should be done on a regular basis anyway, not just every 4 years.
You can have 10.
There we go. 10 starting now. This is something that I wanted to see happen with Canada Lands. This morning that was promised by our party leader that the lands will be opened up. So this is something that we have already promised that we will do, and we're the first ones to do so.
All right, thank you. All right, the next question is, would you support a policy by which federal office buildings give preference to downtown and Main Street locations? So locating federal offices in downtown and on Main Streets. And this question goes first to the NDP.
Me? No, NDP.
To Emma.
She said. Yes, I would support that. I believe that the federal government can influence local economies by strategically placing buildings and offices. And this question is about community well-being. We can't talk about community well-being without talking about community health. We are in a healthcare crisis in this province, and that is a direct result of Liberal inaction. We sent an entire slate of Liberals to Ottawa on this promise of infrastructure money for hospitals and better health transfers, and what we got was a nursing home bed shortage, ER closures and overcrowding, and a doctor shortage. We need to solve these issues if people are going to go out and enjoy their community.
All right, to our Conservative candidates, do you support a policy of locating federal office buildings in downtowns?
I would say yes and no. Yes, if it's where the services that these people need, you have to have close access to the services that you rely on. If it is a government building that is not necessarily required to be in the downtown, maybe put it on the outside of town so that we can have more affordable housing in the downtown. Put it or in a community that really needs the jobs. Does this office need to be here? I'm thankful that Canada Revenue has opened up shop in Newfoundland, helps them with jobs too. And then if it was another building in downtown Ottawa that doesn't need to be there, it would just cause more rents to go up around it and things like that. So I think you can do this strategically, but going off what Emma said too regarding healthcare is connected to this too. We got a lot of baby boomers out there. And a lot of them are going to be transitioning out of their homes and into long-term care facilities. We are not prepared for that. We are living longer, and we are living longer with difficult and long-standing illnesses that cause us to not be able to live on our own, but it's not enough to warrant being put into a hospital. And right now, we can leave you at home, or we can send you a VON to help you out at home, or we put you into a hospital. There's not a lot of the in-between. Those are cheaper than a hospital, they're more caring than a hospital, and it'll actually get more people into the care that they need. And then we can look at, even when they sell their homes to help care for them through that, then there's more homes being available. So even us having a national good healthcare strategy on that with care facilities is actually going to help increase the housing supply. Because the millennials, you guys are coming online economically. I know it's tough now, but with lower taxes and an increased economy, you're going to be able to be buying up these houses that are going to be vacated. And this is what is. So.
Right, thank you. To our Green Party candidates, just a reminder, the question is, would you support a policy by which federal office buildings give preference to downtown and Main Street locations?
I got the housing box, you could tell.
We traded.
Our answer is yes, we definitely would. We definitely need public buildings, are really important to downtown and for economic reasons as well, and definitely with Main Street locations. We need municipal offices buildings. We need courthouses and libraries. and post offices are essential components to healthy downtowns. These facilities draw many employees and users of public services who are likely to spend money in the downtown business, which helps the local economy. Remember those days when we actually walked down to Canada Revenue Office? Anybody remember those days? We could just walk down. If you have a problem with your taxes, you can go down and speak to a person. Isn't that great? I want that back. But also, we need people to live downtown. We need social housing so bad. We need to build neighborhoods, not condos. That's really important. Yes, we need neighborhoods. We need to build small businesses around the neighborhoods. That's what we need, because there's no sense having all these beautiful services downtown Halifax if nobody lives there. We really have to change this. Thank you.
Thank you. And to our Liberal candidates, how do you feel about giving preference to downtown and Main Street locations when it comes to picking a spot for federal office buildings?
I feel great about it, and I'll come right out and say that I believe moving the CRA office out of the downtown was a terrible mistake, and it's a mistake that I'd like to see undone. In that particular case, we all know that the building is a distressed building and it's empty, and we've all seen the kind of the girders on the side of the buildings holding these stone slabs on for a couple of decades now. So it really, in that case, we had to do something, at least temporarily, but I look forward to fighting to bring CRA and others back downtown. I'm really proud to see IRCC really running their operation out of the Hamburg building on Brunswick Street, or on Sackville Street rather. That's on transit. It's close to where people work during the day. People are easy to get there. I beg your pardon, the Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada office. I spoke in a little jargon there, but this is a really important office as well. When I worked at the City of Halifax as a city planner, I founded something called the Opportunity Sites Task Force. And the purpose of that was to identify municipal, provincial, and federally owned land that was dormant or underperforming and convert it into something that had a public good. One of the headliners of that came out of that task force was the new Central Public Library on what had been a gravel parking lot for several decades. But there are many other opportunities that exist in federal and other public land ownership, because at the end of the day, we own that. That's ours, right? We get to have a say, you and I and everyone in this audience, a say about what we do with our land that Canada Lands owns. There's a huge opportunity to bring those services back to where the population density is and where transit serves.
Okay, I'll ask if there's anyone who wants to rebut anything that was said. Okay, our next question is going to be handled, or next couple of questions be handled by a young lady from PRJCT. They held an event called Rise to Vote yesterday at Common Good Solutions in the north end of Halifax, and they generated from that gathering 2 questions to ask the candidates, and these questions will be asked tonight by Emily Miller. You want to come out, Emily?
Thank you so much for having me today. So the first question I have for you is, how would you create networks of car-free, accessible transportation options that enable mobility within and between our communities?
And this goes to the Conservative candidates first.
Well, and as I alluded to earlier, sitting on the Leading with Transit committee for the last 2 years, we've been really looking at some alternatives to accessible cities and how to get around the city. This goes back to Andy's claim that he did such a great job on this new plan for the city. Well, the head planner, who's retired from the city of Toronto, came down and critiqued it and talked about the way Lil had mentioned that we develop individual areas. So you would go to places like the North End and do the plan there and do a plan all over the city so that they become integrated and accessible. And then you can introduce not only bike lanes and walking areas, but you could also, I don't know if anybody knows this, but in 1986, with a population of 400,000 people, the city of Vancouver introduced their first SkyTrain. And there's absolutely no reason why the city of Halifax couldn't have light rail rapid trains bringing people in and out of the city, reducing the carbon footprint of all those cars that are sitting in traffic every morning and every night, and just make it more walkable, more accessible. And so I have lots of ideas around that, and I look forward as the MP to bringing them to Halifax. Thank you.
Now to the Green Party candidates.
Well, we just recently announced a plank in our platform to increase funding dramatically to stimulate reinvestment in public transportation. We know that if we can start moving people in our cities and between our cities with electric vehicles, with hydrogen-powered vehicles, we can cut our greenhouse gases. And we can also provide the lifestyle that so many people are looking for. So we're saying, let's set a goal. Let's set a goal that we'll have zero carbon public transportation everywhere in this country by 2040. That's a goal. As they say in the transportation business, if you don't know where you're going, it's pretty hard to get there. So it's time we said that is our goal, to get to zero carbon by 2040. But it is important to interconnect it, as you said. And I think we look at what I would call intermodal. We need buses to be going to a train station regularly. We need to be able to say, you can take a bus into the city, pick up your electric bike or your electric car, and take it on a lovely path or passageway that is a bike lane to take it to your office, and you can leave it there because there's a station there where it can be parked. I mean, they're doing this in other cities. We're not reinventing the wheel. What we have to do is invest in these good ideas, and we know that if you put these in place, people will use them. The town of Bridgewater put in a bus service, and they were able to not only serve their community, but cut their car use. If Bridgewater can do it, Halifax should get a little ahead of the curve.
Okay, to our Liberal candidates next.
Emily, thanks to you and to your crew for putting the questions together and for bringing them here tonight with great appreciation. The mayor, when he began this evening, spoke about the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, FCM. FCM, about 4 years ago, came out with a report card on the condition of Canadian community infrastructure, and we had some pretty serious failing grades across the board. Really, we had been left, Canadian cities had been left with a ticking time bomb of unfunded financial liability from chronic underfunding and chronic underinvestment by the previous federal government. And it's frankly one of the reasons that, as a planner, that I ran for that and climate action, why I ran to be the MP here. Now, federal MPs and federal governments can't design transit routes. They don't decide where a bike lane goes. But we can certainly provide funding for those things. And we can certainly provide criteria around that funding that can guide the efficient and effective use of that funding. And so that's why our federal government has created a nearly $30 billion public transit fund. Here in Halifax, that's landed with nearly $30 million investment that's brought us 39 new buses, 2 new ferries, 13 new paratransit or Accessibus buses. It goes on and on. It's got also our funding contribution to the 30 kilometers of bike lane. I had a little ride on an electric scooter down by the Seaport Market a couple of weeks ago, and it was incredible. This is a city that is ready to embrace low emission, zero emission transportation modality. People are ready for that. I mentioned earlier the number of people that we're capturing to live in the urban core relative to years past. People want to be downtown. They want to be able to walk or bike or take the bus to where they need to get to. They want to have a healthy lifestyle with a low carbon impact.
And the NDP next.
It's a shame that as the cost of living goes up and wages stagnate and we're facing a climate crisis, that our transit fees and fares are going up. And the NDP will work with municipalities towards a fare-free transit. We are dedicated to ensuring, yeah, it's exciting. I'm an avid transit user, don't own a car. We are dedicated to ensuring that transit and other municipal fleets are electrified by 2030. We know that this has positive impacts on local businesses and communities, and under our plan, Dartmouth and Halifax will not be left behind. And you may remember that Jagmeet Singh's last visit to Dartmouth, before today, included a cycling tour of our beautiful community. We are dedicated to creating a national cycling strategy, as it's time for a new deal to actually win the fight against climate crisis and encourage active transportation that is safe, practical, and recreational. We will expand passenger rail between communities across the country. We'll reestablish rural bus routes abandoned by Greyhound and expand bus service in rural regions. And we will make it easier for Canadian manufacturers to build zero-emission vehicles and ensure that by 2040, 100% of Canadian-produced vehicles are zero-emissions vehicles. We will even create a Centre of Excellence for zero-emission vehicles. We will increase zero-emission vehicle incentives to $15,000 and waive federal sales taxes on ZEVs and help homeowners cover the cost of home charging stations.
Thank you. So the second question that we came up with was... Oh.
I'm sorry, yes, of course. Go ahead.
I just want to point out that while I would agree with our NDP colleague on a lot of what was said, and I would encourage that we be able to work together on this, a big part of what is in that platform right now, for example, the $15,000 off EVs, can't be done because they're not being built in Canada. So it's important to know what the promises are and how they would be delivered. We're calling to double the gas tax that goes to municipalities. So you have to look at, that is how you put transit in place. And setting goals means that then municipalities know they don't get the money if they don't do it. So you do have to be careful of the jurisdiction. Just wanted to point that out.
Are there other comments?
I just wanted to point out too that I think we just bought 6 or 7 diesel buses in HRM. Should be all electric. That should just totally unacceptable right now. And I also want to let people know that I know that they're idling all the buses in Dartmouth all night, all through the winter, all night. So I said, well, why would you do that? Well, we want to make sure they go in the morning. Really? So this is totally unacceptable. There's a lot of leaks and all kinds of things happening in the city that we have to address. That's one of them. That's unacceptable. So now it's out there.
All right, thank you. We'll have to get the mayor back up here. All right. And your second question.
So what are you going to do to ensure people in the workforce and the next generation who will be entering the workforce have the skills necessary to make a living, knowing that the future of work is very different from the past?
And that question goes first to the Green Party candidates.
It's a great question and one we've been thinking a lot about. The first thing we would do, when my grandmother was in school, education was free to grade 8. When my mother was in school, it was free to grade 10. My education was free to grade 12. It is time that all post-secondary education had free tuition. That's the first thing. A well-educated population, and in order to get work, and so that's community college, that's trades, that's universities, so free tuition. We'd also forgive federal debt over $10,000, which allows young people to concentrate. Yes, you can applaud that. I've got kids with debt. I know about that. We go beyond that. We know that the nature of work is changing. So we are proposing that Canada put in place a universal basic income that It will take some time. I will do the same thing I said to Emma. It will take some time to put that in place, but that has to be the goal, so that we have for protection for people whose jobs are just not going to exist in the future.
And to the Liberal candidates, the same question.
Thank you very much. We were talking about entrepreneurs, talking about young people coming into the workforce. And again, I go back to the downtown Dartmouth core where we have so many young entrepreneurs, many of which are women. That's what's breathing. That's what's breathing. Yes, you. Young. Breathing new life and vibrancy into downtown Dartmouth. And I say this quite often. There's never been a better time to live in Dartmouth-Cole Harbour. Take young entrepreneurs like Lil. Thank you for everything you do, Lil, in the downtown core. How about people like Sheena Russell of Made with Local, poet over at Lake City Cider, and of course, who can miss Renee at the canteen? These are absolutely incredible young entrepreneurs. We've lowered the small business tax rate, and we've been working on removing red tape It's making it so difficult for businesses to navigate and to succeed. We've invested heavily in innovation. Young, innovative entrepreneurs doing things, again, as I said earlier in the opening, doing things that they once had to leave Nova Scotia for. They had to go down the road. They couldn't do them here. Something that's really exciting, we just announced that a re-elected Liberal government would provide up to 2,000 entrepreneurs with as much as $50,000 to launch a new business. That, to me, is incredible. There are so many people out there that want to take the chance to start a business, and what a head start this would give to those young people. We're going to make it easier and cheaper for them to incorporate, and we're finally eliminating the swipe fee on the HST and the GST portion of credit card transactions. That's going to save businesses $500 million in Canada. The first year is often the toughest for businesses, so those savings will make a big difference. So specifically, our office has worked so hard with new businesses, working so hard to get them grants, to get them loans, get them help set up. And I gotta tell you, we need to do a better job to allow young entrepreneurs to navigate the federal system.
All right, thank
Because-
you very much.
Thanks.
That's your time. Next to the NDP, Emma Norton.
So as a young person, I get it. I understand this question. I am constantly worried about the future. And I'm in this for everyone, but especially for young people like me who are concerned about the future. I believe that access to education should never depend on how much money your parents make or how much debt you can carry. If you have the grades and the drive to study hard, you should be able to get the education you want at any age, in any community. And that's why the NDP is committed to ensuring that every Canadian has access to publicly funded education, from affordable childcare and early years education through to university and college, apprenticeship training, skills development, and retraining programs. We will work to include post-secondary education as part of our public education system. That means universities and colleges publicly funded. We will eliminate interest on federal student loans. We'll move away from loans and significantly increase access to non-repayable student grants. I also just heard Jagmeet say this afternoon, if we can forgive the loans to corporations that amount to $6 billion, why can't we forgive student debts? Our platform, A New Deal for People, will create 300,000 green jobs in the first mandate, just 4 years. We will invest into training and retraining for these jobs. We have committed to a federal $15 minimum wage across the country, which will lift the bar for all wages at all jobs. Part of ensuring that you have a job that provides enough to make a living means keeping the cost of living low. It means pharmacare, dental care, health care, child care, and reliable public services.
Thank you. And finally, to the Conservative candidates.
First of all, Emily, thank you for spearheading this and coming up here and asking these questions. That's brave of you. And I really want to highlight that because one thing that we're talking about what the federal government is going to do, this is a federal government debate, but we often, when we're talking about social policy and about the things we want, we often don't talk about the power of the individual citizen. And so when we talked about affordable housing and things like that, I hope that we're all helping out with places that are building homes like Habitat for Humanity and helping out with shelters and things like that to make it so that we have our time to be able to help volunteer. But to this particular question, we need life to be more affordable because people are in education is one of them. So we've released a platform that is going to increase the ability to invest into an education RSP. And so with that, that's going to allow parents, with all the other taxes that we're going to give them, tax-free, tax breaks, credits through as we talk about the tax breaks for education. We talk about tax breaks for the RSP. We talk about tax breaks for home heating that is going to allow parents to put more money into a TSFA, to put more money into these savings accounts. We think this is important to be able to help parents to be able to help their kids along. I know it. I've got 4 kids of my own, 2 in high school, 1 in junior high, and 1 in elementary. University is coming fast, and we need to make sure that we have a good economy, that people are making good jobs, that they can save for their kids and not be taxed to death. Also, one of the major reasons why the increasing of tuition in Canada and around the world, for that matter, is the exorbitant salaries of those at the top in those universities. They didn't make that 20, 30 years ago. They're making millions per year. And we need to start asking, as individual citizens, get involved and start asking, why? Why is tuition going up? Not just what more can the government do, but what are these institutions doing for them to be accountable to the services that they provide? And to make sure that they are indeed, the products that they are trying to sell us, that they're indeed going to be able to produce the wages that they say that they will, and to hold them accountable that way as well. I know it's a bit of a different slant on that, but that is exactly what will help us to get the right workers. And Canada, you know what is awesome? We've got it's like one of the, if not the highest educated labor forces in the world, and we need to make sure that that continues to happen so that Canada will be a bright shining light as we innovate our way through many of the issues the rest of the world is turning a blind eye to.
Okay, is there any candidate who would like to rebut? Go ahead.
Well, I don't know if you've ever taught at a university, but I have, and I just want to tell you they're not overpaid. In fact, but you know what? We have a crisis in this country of sessional workers. You're right, we should investigate how people are being paid. But people with good educations, because they believe in university educations, are going and working very hard and not making the wages that they deserve. So they're not staying in post-secondary education. And this is something we do have to look at as a country. But to say the reason that the tuitions are going up is because people are being paid too much is really an insult to the people who are teaching there. So
I'm going to let Jason Cole respond to that. I believe you said people at the top of the university administration.
Thank you for the clarification. Our teachers do not get paid enough, okay? But when you're making $4.5, $5 million, even more than that, just to have the title CEO, you know how to think some high-performing people? Yeah, they can make some money, but you know, when we're dependent on this, we got to look at is that really? That's something that we should have the conversation on. Is when people at the top in these universities are making millions of dollars a year.
one president, how much they're making. Nobody's making $4 million.
Look into it. I invite you.
Married to Faye, my wife, who happens to be a professor at St. Mary's in the Language Institute. I don't think the professors get paid enough either.
Okay, thank you. And thanks so much for those questions. Emily Miller, thank you, from Project Citizen. You see, I got to have a ninth inning stretch. That's good. The next question, which goes first to our Liberal candidates, is on arts and culture. The question is this: arts and culture make communities more vibrant and attractive for young people, for new Canadians, for businesses and investment. What specific plans do you have to encourage arts and culture, and would you increase funding?
Thanks, Normally. So I'll start by saying that having grown up in Halifax, I kind of grew up in these very seats that we're sitting in here tonight. Neptune Theatre, I grew up in the seats of the Rebecca Cohen and the corridors of the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia. So I have sort of long lived the life of an arts and culture supporter, and I thank my parents for giving me that tremendous gift. And I have to say, as the MP for Halifax, I'm extremely proud of our government's record on supporting arts and culture. Our government has made the biggest reinvestment in the arts and culture and media sector in Canada in 30 years, over $3 billion over the last 4 years, and the largest in the G7. This has been extremely important. For Halifax, this means a new Art Gallery of Nova Scotia on the waterfront. It means the new Culture Link in the old World Trade Center. It means support for renovation projects right here at Neptune, the seats you're sitting in and the lights that we're all glistening under tonight are a result of that investment. And many other small performance venues as well, like the Pond Playhouse, for example. There are so many. We're investing heavily in arts and cultural organizations. We've doubled the investment in the Canada Council for the Arts with $550 million over 5 years. We've increased funding for Telefilm Canada by $22 million. We've increased funding for the National Film Board by $13.5 million. $675 million to the CBC to restore the funding cut by the Conservative government. Isn't that good? Okay, there's more work to do. There's definitely more work to do. We're busy updating the Copyright Act for our creators, which was written before the internet was invented, and which is not treating our creators well right now as their work is streamed and so forth over streaming over the top streaming platforms. I know all this because I spent the last year or so as the Parliamentary Secretary to Canada's Minister of Heritage, Pablo Rodriguez, traveling the country, speaking to our creators, be they performers, be they music recording artists, be they writers, authors. We need to change the landscape for the arts and culture in Canada, and we're in the midst of doing that, and we'll continue to do that.
Okay, thank you very much. The same question to the New Democratic Party representative tonight. What specific plans do you have to encourage arts and culture, and would you increase funding?
Yes, we would increase funding. Under Stephen Harbour, arts organizations like the Canada Council for the Arts or the CBC were bludgeoned. And the Trudeau Liberals have let them bleed out. Artists are leaving Halifax and Dartmouth. Companies are refusing to film here because we no longer have a tax credit, which I feel very deeply through many of my friends and family. And our government representatives are just sitting idly by. The Liberal government is very quick to criticize Doug Ford when he makes cuts, but where were they when we asked about Stephen McNeil cutting the film tax credit? And they said it's a provincial matter. So the NDP does have a plan to invest in the arts, including make life easier for those making a living in the arts by introducing a tax averaging program for artists and culture workers. We will invest in the CBC and Radio-Canada. We will invest in Indigenous arts, and we will level the playing field for Canadian producers by not sitting idly by and letting American tech giants pulverize our industry. Netflix, Google, and Facebook, these companies need to pay their fair share.
Thank you. To our Conservative candidates, Bruce, you're taking it.
Thank you, Normally. This is a tough one for me because I have a daughter who's in the film and television industry here in Halifax. She's worked on everything from Mr. D to The Lighthouse to you name it, she's worked on it. She's produced and directed a number of her own short films, so it's near and dear to my heart. At the same time, you know, we have so many social issues that we need to deal with, whether it's housing or hospitals or health or, you know, it just goes on, the litany of things that have not been addressed in recent years. So yes, I would like to, and I would as much as I can, encourage our government to increase funding to the arts, but you know, that would be tempered with making sure that social issues and the needs of social issues are met. Thank you.
Thank you. And to our Green Party candidates.
Well, it's near and dear to my heart too, Bruce. We have a son who is a graduate of the Dow Theatre program and spends a lot of his time making people laugh across the country. We have a daughter who has a degree from NASCAD and is unfortunately working in the United States. We have a daughter who lives in the Valley and is a film producer who just had a film at the Atlantic Film Festival. So the arts contribute greatly to who we are as Canadians, and they are being underfunded. I would say that the Liberal government had stopped the bleeding. I don't think they let them bleed out totally, Emma. But you know, it's too bad, Andy. If we had proportional representation, you and I could both work on this. Share a vision. So yes, like my colleague in the NDP, we would close the tax loophole. That means that Netflix and Google and Facebook are not paying taxes in Canada. They would pay taxes, and those taxes were going to film production companies. So yes, thank you. We would look at increasing funding for Canada's arts and culture. And I know that I have a bias here because I worked for the CBC for a long time. Funding was restored, and I'm very grateful to the Liberal government, but it simply stabilized the CBC. We would increase funding to CBC and Radio-Canada by $315 million a year until they reach the per capita level of funding that we see it by the BBC in England. It is time that our national public broadcaster, which is one of the best in the world, had a chance to stand on its own 2 feet and was not constantly crippled by government funding.
All right, thank you. There is time for rebuttal. Okay, we'll keep going. Our next question involves funding, sort of a complicated funding formula. Hopefully the audience will be able to follow what I'm about to tell you. We're going to talk about urban development agreements and support for our cities. Urban development agreements were once extensively used in Western provinces, and using these agreements, federal, provincial, and city governments signed three-way funding agreements and undertook large urban projects. So our question tonight to the candidates is, would you support reinstatement of the use of urban development agreements, particularly with the COA? And if not, given that the provinces constitutionally oversee cities, what do you feel is the best way for the federal government to provide funding to cities? And this question first goes to Emma Norton with the NDP.
So overall, I think it would be a very good thing for the federal government to reestablish an urban affairs office or department, or make a cabinet minister responsible. This has been the case in the past, but not now. And in part because so many people live in cities, and in part because the core issues are so complex, expensive, and important, the federal government must be involved. The issues that are related are affordable housing, transportation, and a wide array of environmental matters, like water and sewage, as well as energy use. Right now, we are in a health crisis, and we have P3 projects that are years away from completion. And I think infrastructure support from the federal government is essential in building clean, accessible, and equitable cities. Projects like Alderney Gate, Shannon Park, and the Cogswell Interchange need support from the federal government. And a COA should be handled by a minister from Atlantic Canada.
Thank you. To our Conservative candidates, Jason, are you taking this one?
Yep.
Okay.
I'm agreeing with the NDP. We're going to be bringing the Minister for COA back to the Maritimes, back to Atlantic Canada. And what do you think, Bruce? You want that cabinet portfolio, or should I take it? So on top of that, yes, we see that urbanization is growing in Canada, and these questions are going to be more important. Somewhere around the 80% of all Canadians live in or near cities. So this conversation here tonight is very time-worthy, and we're going to be learning a lot from other municipalities as we all go through this. As we do continue to go through this, I would like to point out that timely, not just agreements, but timely delivery of infrastructure funds is important. There's been billions of dollars for infrastructure funds that have been promised, talked about, not delivered. And we need to see a really good way of seeing that when the promises are made and agreements are made, it's one thing to have an agreement, but if the dollars don't show up in a timely manner, things get stalled, and that's when backlogs happen and causes a myriad of problems I could list on all day. So with that, what our party would work with the provinces, because cities are governed by, are overseen by the provinces, and to find really a national strategy that doesn't interfere, but is to bring us together and to make sure that we can actually get the infrastructure that they need in a timely manner across this whole country.
To the Green Party, the same question. What do you feel is the best way for the federal government to provide funding to cities?
I'm a big fan of urban development agreements. And one of the reasons I'm a big fan is I have lived through one. I lived in Winnipeg from 1981 to 91 when the Core Area Initiative was in place. A successful 3 orders of government working together to revitalize a city core. And if you've been to Winnipeg and you have had a chance to see the Exchange District or the new Red River College that's downtown or the restored heritage buildings, you're looking at what a tri-level government agreement can do. And it gets rid of that red tape because it puts the money in place and it lets the 3 levels of government on the ground run with it. You're not spending all your time applying for grants. But I think it is time, if we look at urban development agreements in this day and age, that they have at the table Indigenous governments as well. So I would say there are 4 levels of government. Because we are on unsurrendered, unceded Indigenous territory. So they are governments that must come to the table. These are great projects, and I think it's time that we looked at where they can best be used in our urban areas across the city. You know, we do have projects that will involve the private sector, and I look at one, and I'm going to give Andy some credit for this. The Halifax Cultural Hub is a good project. However, there's one weak link there, and that is the private sector's putting in $2 million to provide rent for a 20-year lease. I worry about what happens at the end of 20 years. I look at what happened with Art Space in Winnipeg, where the arts community owned the building and have that legacy in perpetuity. That's what happens when you bring all levels of government to the table. You can leave a greater legacy. So I think it's a great idea, and I think we should do more of it.
Thank you. And to our Liberal candidates.
Normally, I just want to ask for some clarity. So right now we're talking about urban development agreements. I believe there's a question about a national urban strategy that's still to come. Is that correct?
We are going to talk about that.
Okay,
yes.
Good. I didn't want to sow confusion, but okay, very good. So urban development agreements. This is an extremely powerful tool. It's one that I used to teach about when I was on the faculty at the Dalhousie School of Planning, and what I was able to teach was from my own personal experience in practice. When I was a planner here at the City of Halifax, my colleagues and I would often lament that some of the money that was available through ACOA, the Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency, for urban improvement projects, be it a streetscape or perhaps a multimodal transit hub, was limited to population centers in Atlantic Canada with fewer than 100,000 people. And we thought that wasn't really fair. We felt, we're kind of the economic hub, the cultural hub, the social hub of the region. I have to admit, though, after being the MP for the last 4 years and learning more about the challenges that the rural communities in Atlantic Canada are going through, I understand that $100,000 cap, $100,000 person cap much better. And it hasn't harmed Halifax. In fact, over the last 3 years, we've been able to triple the amount of federal investment in Halifax relative to the 4 years prior to 2015. So this whole idea that we can, it kind of goes back to the Canada Lands Project in a way, those large mega sites where there are tremendous opportunities to make big impact on our community, whether it's transit, whether it's affordable housing, whether it could be a district heating plant or a cultural center, a center for Indigenous reconciliation, anything like that, any of those sort of large and important projects that have a public benefit, that have a good public purpose, and I know there was a great one in Winnipeg, I visited it, is a really a laudable thing to do. And I believe that notwithstanding the 100,000 person cap that I mentioned, there is work to do to have the three levels of government work together to have greater impact in our cities.
Thank you. There is an opportunity for rebuttal. Okay, go ahead, Bruce.
I just want to add one thing. Normally, it's my experience that in many instances it could be just a straight urban between the federal government and the municipalities, that there's not actually always necessary to have the province in there. The funding formula can be different. It'd be more from the feds and less from the municipality. But oftentimes projects don't go ahead because the province, it's not a priority for them. So, but it is for the municipality. Municipalities trying to browbeat the province into saying yes, 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 and they just keep getting a no, no, no. And so I don't think that in all cases, or I think in many cases, we can just do a straight urban development agreement with the municipality.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is one that Andy Fillmore alluded to, and that is on an urban strategy. Jason said earlier, more than 80% of Canadians live in cities, and despite this, there is no national urban strategy. There is no government department devoted to urban affairs. We heard a couple of candidates tonight say they would change that. So as a result, the federal government response to issues that play out in cities and downtowns are sometimes dealt with in what we refer to as a siloed manner. What should a national urban strategy look like, and how would it be implemented? That's the question, first going to the Conservative candidates tonight.
Well, an urban strategy, it would be, it's so different across the country. So that I think that you need to have a strategy for Halifax. You may need to have a strategy for Montreal or Winnipeg or Vancouver. They may not, it's not a cookie cutter situation. We definitely need a national strategy. A minister would certainly be really beneficial to have a cabinet minister at the table who's fighting for urban communities. And so that's, I think it would be really good to do that. And what that would look like, again, it may not be the same for every part of the country. So let's do it, and let's make sure that it happens as a federal government, and make sure that the urban areas are looked after way better than they are today. Thank you.
Thank you. Same question to our Green Party candidates. What should a national urban strategy look like, and how would it be implemented?
Well, I'm not trying to butter up the organizers, but I have to say that I do think this document that we were all sent, called One National Voice, an Urban Agenda, is a pretty good outline for how do we go about putting together a national urban strategy. It is in our platform that we do believe we should have a national urban strategy in this country. For some very important reasons, yes, 80% of our population is now living in cities. A third of our municipal infrastructure is in poor, fair, or very poor condition. That is a challenge to our municipalities. And in many cases, that is being borne, the brunt of that is being borne by our urban cores. We are looking at social street issues the price of that is being borne by our urban cores. So if you have an urban strategy, you're ensuring that your city centers, the heartbeat of many communities, are not being hollowed out and left behind because you're not addressing issues, street issues, social issues. We've talked a lot about housing today. So as we go forward, we need to invest in our downtowns and in our urban cores, but we need to have a strategy. I haven't even gotten to the cost to our downtowns of climate change. So we have to also invest in mitigating climate change. A recent report says that for every dollar we invest now in climate change, in fighting climate change, we will get a $4 return. We'll get a $4 return. It's actually a good investment. But the longer we wait, the higher the cost, the lower the return. Our urban centers need us to have a strategy, and that strategy not only has to address infrastructure, it has to address climate change and how we become more carbon efficient.
Thank you. And we'll have more on climate change shortly. To our Liberal candidates.
Thanks, Norma Lee. And I guess I would start by saying first, as the first planner elected to the House of Commons, it would be my great delight to be Canada's Minister of Urban Affairs. Bruce, and if you don't mind, that is, of course, we've heard this language before that exists in municipal, or rather in provincial legislation that governs cities and communities, that cities are the creatures of the province. And this puts cities in a sort of a position of fealty to provincial governments. While I was at the city, I worked with others to have a bill passed in the provincial legislature called the HRM Charter Act that was meant to give the city a little bit more, you remember this, Darren, because you were a councillor at the time, to give the city a little bit more autonomy in changing the rules by which it plays under the Municipal Government Act at the provincial level. I would say that our federal government is investing $180 billion in Canada's communities right now. This is a new deal. This is a new deal magnitude kind of investment with funding for things earmarked like public transit, wastewater infrastructure, trade infrastructure, social infrastructure, and we've also brought the federal government back into the housing game through the National Housing Strategy. We've also brought along the Smart Cities Challenge. There is no question that there is a greater role for the government to play in cities. Someone mentioned earlier the need for a federal department to manage housing. I spent the first 8 years of my career after graduating from here in Halifax, working in the northeastern United States in Boston, where we worked very closely with the policies of the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development. Wise to put those two things together. Canada needs something like this. It's absolutely essential as our country and our world becomes more urbanized, as the pressures to do with transit and housing equity and social equity and addressing climate change and sea level rise become more and more acute. This is a necessity, I do believe.
Thank you. All right, and finally to Evan Rowe, who's the NDP.
Andy, I'm happy to hear you reference the New Deal, as that's the name of our platform, the New Deal for People. Like I said before, it would be very beneficial for the Canadian government to establish an urban affairs office. We are a very big country, and that comes with very different cities, unlike countries in Europe, where cities are very close together and often similar in size and geography. Not always, but cities in our country have very distinct traits. What works for Toronto might not work for Calgary, and that might not work for Dartmouth or Halifax. What we do need to take into account in a national urban strategy needs to be built on certain fundamentals: affordable housing, public transit, and public healthcare infrastructure. We also need to realize the relationship between rural and cities. It's hard to build healthy cities when emergency rooms across the province are closed and funneled into our city ERs, creating longer wait times and overcrowding.
Thank you. Would anyone like a chance for a rebuttal? Okay, we'll move on. Next question is one that's been alluded to in many ways tonight, and it's on climate change. And the question is, what should the federal government do to tackle climate change, particularly as it impacts coastal cities such as Halifax, Dartmouth? And that question goes first to the Green Party candidates.
This is a big one for me, so I'll have to be reined and probably cut off. The IPCC report states that global warming cannot exceed 1.5 Celsius. This platform, everyone has to read this platform, because it is the only platform that will get us the goal and achieve this goal. It is the only platform. The current federal target is 30% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions below 2005 levels by 2030. This was set by the Conservative Prime Minister Harbour in 2015, so nothing has changed. The Green government, us, will pass into a law of Climate Change Act requiring 60% cut in greenhouse gas emissions by 2005 levels by 2030, reaching a zero net by 2050. We are the only game changer. Sorry. We will establish a cross-party inter-cabinet to deal with climate change. Another 2 minutes. I got it. There'll be no new pipelines, no coal, oil or gas drilling or mining, including offshore wells. That's good for us in Nova Scotia, protecting our waters. That will not be approved. Existing oil and gas operations will continue on declining basis. The bitumen production phased out between 2030 and 2035. Hydraulic fracturing, banned. Operations will be banned. I can't wait to do that one. We outright impacts on groundwater quality, methane release, and systematic activity. We'll establish climate change emission targets for all components of food systems. That's my one, including nitrogen fertilizer use, livestock reduction, and transportation. Food is such a huge box on climate change, and it's not really addressed loud enough. I feel I can be a good voice on that. That's why I built a business. We are so food insecure for Nova Scotia. If we got hit by a hurricane tomorrow, which we did last week, I don't know if everybody noticed how empty the shelves were after just a couple of days. We got 3 days of food left, folks. So food security for us, Northern Climate, we got to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, to our Liberal candidates. What should the federal government do to tackle climate change, particularly as it impacts coastal cities like ours?
I'm going to go really fast because there's so much to fit in here. Look, we absolutely need a credible plan to tackle climate change. I know that because I've been working on climate plans for my entire career, but I also know it because I knock on thousands of doors in Halifax, not just this year, but every year since my election, and this is what is front of mind for Haligonians right now. We have developed, the Liberal government has created the Pan-Canadian Framework on Clean Growth and Climate Change. It's a real plan. It's got buy-in from the provinces and territories. It's going to get us to meet our emissions reductions targets as they exist today, and if those go up, we'll work to get a way to meet those new emissions targets as well. Since 2015, our government has committed over $60 billion to combat climate change, including $28 billion to support urban public transit, $26 billion in green infrastructure, launching a $2 billion low carbon economy fund that supports projects that generate clean growth and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We've committed $1.5 billion for the Oceans Protection Plan, $1.3 billion for Nature Conservancy for terrestrial and land-based habitats, $2.3 billion to support clean technology, $1 billion to support energy efficiency initiatives through the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. We have, this summer I announced $18 million here in Halifax to create an urban climate center with Efficiency One in Dartmouth. We've put a national price on carbon pollution. We have announced our intention to phase out single-use plastics. We're phasing out coal power. All of that $180 billion investment that I mentioned for communities is now being administered through a climate lens, which flows directly from my own private member's motion, M45, requiring life cycle GHG analyses for every application for government infrastructure. We have a Green New Deal. It's in operation right now. Now, this is what this country needs, and it's happening.
Thank you. Okay, to the NDP candidate tonight, Emma.
Thank you. I'm going to start by thanking Our Time and 350.org for endorsing me as a climate champion, one of 13 across the country, and the only endorsed candidate in Nova Scotia. I am very humbled to have their endorsement because I greatly respect their work. Climate change isn't a problem of the future, it's a problem right now, and now is the time to act with urgency. Around the world, unpredictable weather patterns are wreaking havoc. Heat waves are putting the most vulnerable at risk, as we've seen in Nova Scotia this past summer, where we have some senior citizens, many, on fixed incomes that couldn't afford to pay for air conditioning. Droughts affect our neighbors, flash floods can destroy our homes, and the quality of our air affects our health. I spoke to a mother on a doorstep the other day who told me my 15-year-old daughter lies awake at night worried about the climate emergency. And I was able to talk to her daughter, and say, this is why I'm doing this. I am doing this for you. The time for thinking of doing this for the children is over. It's time we started acting with them. And we can solve this. The NDP has a comprehensive, exciting plan for climate action. We will create 300,000 jobs in the next 4 years. We will make significant investments in training, retraining, and ensure that all workers get the support they need during the transition. We will vigorously defend pensions of workers who are retiring, and we will defend workers for the entire transition. An important part of our plan will ensure that infrastructure investments contribute to emission reductions and support communities with good, family-sustaining jobs they bring. And we will legislate climate targets that will contribute to Canada's fair share of greenhouse gas emission reductions in order to globally stay below the 1.5 degree mark. Buildings, my specific area of expertise, are 66% of greenhouse gas emissions in HRM. A new democratic government would begin by working in partnership with the provinces and territories to fund energy-efficient retrofits on social housing units and government buildings, expanding outwards from there. We will set a target of retrofitting all housing stock in Canada by 2050. Energy efficiency and sustainable building practices will be at the core of our national housing strategy. I'm trying to speak too quickly because I see myself running out.
And that is your time. Thanks.
Incremental action will no longer cut it.
Okay, let's hear from the Conservative candidates tonight. Jason?
Let me be clear right at the get-go. Climate change is real. Okay. Now imagine that there is This is how I explain it a bit to people that we do need to deal with this. Imagine there's a barrel in front of me full of oil. Now imagine I light it on fire. Now imagine if I do that to 100 million barrels, and then you do that every day. Now I know not all oils burn, but you get the analogy fits. Okay, that doesn't take a rocket science to realize we probably should be doing something different about this. And we will, and we are. I'm also an optimist that I believe that we will be able to work our way, humanity, out of this. I do see some challenges on a global scale because this is a global problem. Not to make any excuses, but to say something very clearly, Canada makes up 1.6% of all global emissions. Last year alone, the rest of the world increased their emissions by 2.8%, which means, as great as all these platforms seem, we could all die tomorrow, and the world in 7 months would replace our carbon emissions. We need to be world leaders on this. We need to be world leaders, and just not here at home when we use our infrastructure funds, which we are going to be doing on massive scale, but also to allow provinces to use those for the goals that we have of decarbonizing. As we continue on this platform, The innovations that we have in Canada, the brilliant people that are in this room, I look forward to the fact of being able to buy an electric car. You know, my home is zero emissions, but it goes to a power plant that is not zero emissions. I look forward to the day when I know that's 100% done that way. I care about the environment. I put my money where my mouth is. I produce, with me and my 4 children and wife, 1 bag of garbage every 2 weeks. We recycle the rest. We actually reduce as much as we possibly can. And we try to even vote with our dollars to make sure that even the power that is in the purchaser is unreal, that what you can do to see that where you vote, where you put your dollars, that's going to do it. Now, to finish it off, we're also going to, so some of the specific things are taxing large emitters, not you. You need those dollars in your pocket so you can make your own green choices. We're going to be taxing big emitters, and then we're also going to be allowing tax breaks in along the way. So when you retrofit your homes so they become zero emissions or closer thereof, you're going to get a tax break so that you can continue to do that good work. And we are going to support you, and we are going to be innovators on a world level that's going to help other countries leapfrog their old dirty technologies into clean ones.
All right, thank you. There is time for rebuttal. Andy Fillmore. Okay, we have several people who want to speak. Let's start with Andy.
Thank you. I just wanted to congratulate Emma for her endorsement. That's really great news, and I know that flows from your work at EAC, and it's really well done. There's another national environmental organization called Green PAC who has identified 25 candidates from all parties. So 338 ridings, about 6 candidates per riding. It's about 1,700 candidates who they've endorsed as being green champions, and recommend that for voters for whom climate is their #1 issue, will consider voting for that person. And Emma, I'm sure you'd be happy to know that I've been named one of those 25 candidates as well. So thank you for opening the door to that.
Thank you. Lil or Joanne, I saw your hands up.
Well, so just because we want to join the endorsement train, Lil and I have both been recognized, and I believe Emma has as well, but I can't be sure, Emma, as Lead Now climate champions. So yeah, you've got some pretty good climate champions on this stage, so I think that's great. But I would like to know, and maybe Jagmeet announced it today, maybe you heard it from Mr. Trudeau, Andy, Elizabeth May has put out a call that before the votes are counted, we all agree that all major parties will create a climate cabinet. So we work together to solve this. Climate champions working together. She has yet to have another party leader that I know of accept her call to work in a collaborative climate cabinet like we had when we had a war cabinet. Do you know if either of your leaders have agreed to that?
Maybe we could have a quick yes or no.
First I've heard of it, can't wait to hear more about it. I think it's a great idea. I sit on the All-Party Climate Caucus with Liz, and we do wonderful work together. In fact, she seconded my private member's motion M45.
Then she was disappointed that you bought a pipeline.
Okay. We've used our rebuttal time. The next question is, how will you work with young entrepreneurs to ensure their success across our region, including in our downtowns? And this question goes first to our Liberal candidates. It was mentioned earlier, I believe, when we were talking about training for young people, but if you want to pick up on that, I'm not sure who's taking that question.
Thanks, Emily. I'll take that one. Supporting small business is an important task for government, regardless who forms it. Some 8 million Canadians, so that's about a quarter of our population, are employed by small businesses. So it's absolutely vital to a thriving middle class. Here in Halifax, I am very lucky to regularly visit places like Volta, like Innovacore, which are, Volta is one of the largest innovation hubs in the region and in Canada. But I go there to support young entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs at all stages of their venture life cycle, not just financially, but also to hear from them firsthand how we can support them better. Now, our government, as Darren has already mentioned, has reduced the small business tax rate from 11% to 9%, which means savings of up to about $7,500 a year for young entrepreneurs, and that can be a lot of money for people. We'll eliminate the so-called swipe fee on HST and GST that merchants must pay credit card companies every time a credit card is swiped. And according to the Canadian Federation of Independent Businesses, this will save businesses around $500 million a year in fees nationwide. Providing access to over $1.5 billion new customers through trade deals like CETA, like CPTPP, and the new USMCA, along with new export diversification strategy that we've undertaken that has the target of increasing Canada's overseas exports by 50%. We're bringing the world to the doorstep of our young entrepreneurs right now. We're moving toward a guaranteed paid family leave, which will mean that parents who don't qualify for paid leave through EI will receive a guaranteed income through the first year of their child's life. We've also made a huge investment in, honestly, it's huge. I hear about it all the time in the office here in Halifax being such a hub for entrepreneurship. Our government also made huge investments in fundamental science and research, meaning more funding for our universities, meaning more funding for those labs where so many of these amazing ideas spring from.
Thank you. Next to the NDP, how will you work with young entrepreneurs to ensure their success?
I've spoken to a lot of entrepreneurs who say that they've been let down. When the Liberals closed the tax loophole on income splitting, it was rushed and poorly executed. I know lawyers, business owners, and accountants, and they didn't necessarily agree with the tax reform, but who felt that it was rushed through. As a result, a lot of business owners, including those in my family, have a small family business, suffered. And we know that the impact big credit card companies are having on businesses. My friend started a web company, set up his credit card and debit transactions through Moneris, and they took 6% of those transactions. That is flooring for a small startup. The NDP would support scaling up tech startups here in Dartmouth and Halifax. Our Universal Pharmacare program would save businesses about $600 per employee, and we would make things easier for businesses by ending unfair tax treatment of family transfers.
Thank you. To our Conservative candidates, Bruce, are you taking this question?
I am.
How will you work with young entrepreneurs?
I have the pleasure as the Executive Director of the Spryfield Business Commission of working with young entrepreneurs every day. It's an honor to be able to help them develop their businesses, whether it's through HR or PR or all of the things that are necessary for them to get ahead. We're working on two initiatives right now. One is the CEDIF, a Community Economic Development Investment Fund, where we're creating an incubation center for young entrepreneurs where we'll allow them spaces at very reduced rates to start their businesses. We recently had a gentleman who, I'm not going to mention his name, but he sold his business. He started in Spryfield, and there was a man who owned it's actually the Royal Bank is in it now, and he gave this guy some space for free for the first year of his business, just to get him going. As a result of that, he ended up building a business which he sold for $52 million. And he recently gave us an appreciation for what the community did for him to get him started. Gave us a $25,000 contribution to the Long Lake Provincial Park when we were developing that. So there's all kinds of things that we can do. There's I was at the Chamber of Commerce. I'm a supporter of the Chamber, but one of the problems with the Chamber is people who are starting in business don't have the money necessary to join the Chamber. They don't have the money to go to their events. And so that's another thing that we're doing is starting a young entrepreneurs Chamber of Commerce where they can afford to go to events that are for young people who are starting out in business. And we're going to kind of start, one of the functions that we're going to do is like a dragon's den for young entrepreneurs. So we're very excited, initiatives on the go with both the CEDIF and the Young Entrepreneurs Chamber, and I just look forward to continuing to help young people grow their businesses in Halifax.
Thank you so much. And finally, the same question to our Green Party candidates. How will you work with young entrepreneurs to ensure their success?
Well, the first thing we need to do is make it easier to be an entrepreneur in the city. And we have to secure the future. It's a pipeline and an LNG plant, the emissions will be over. So just to say that. I know firsthand what it's like to be an entrepreneur in the city because I opened a business. I built 3 restaurants in Halifax, and I know how many permits, roadblocks, and challenges it is to open a business in the city. It's not easy at all. I know these challenges are a municipal level, but as your MP, I would work with all levels of government and help the youth get started and thrive. I've worked and mentored a lot of entrepreneurs for years, for the last 10 years. In this city, we need change. So how do we build a landscape for our youth to thrive? How do we do that? I think, my personal, to be able to have small commercial businesses in neighborhoods so that we can walk to get our hair done and walk to the bakery and get our coffee and get our car fixed or get our bike fixed, a local hardware store, get our dress hemmed. We need that economy in our neighborhoods. Just imagine if we were allowed certain homes and areas to be open for business. Craftsmanship would come back and boom. Building food security with urban agriculture everywhere, right to repair shops everywhere. Wow, eh? A more walkable city, livable city needs tons of cool neighborhoods. We have to support the small businesses, deal with art and music and just cool places to live. It's all about design. Look at the Hydrostone. Everybody wants to live there. So we don't sadly have to shut down an art gallery / coffee shop in North Dartmouth because it was only zoned for a pawn shop. Really? That was shameful. We can't afford, damn rights, that was 2 beautiful entrepreneurs with a child shut down. We can't afford to lose entrepreneurs. We have to rethink this city. But we will establish a sustainable generations fund to make critical investments in all the trades and education that is needed to the transition to the green economy. It's going to be millions of jobs. From a national infrastructure investment, energy efficiency, renewable digital upgrades, clean tech manufacturing, and emerging technologies, tourism, and creative economy. Ooh, I'm over.
And yes,
Thank you very much. Lots to say, lots to do.
You've all been really good about keeping within your times. I appreciate that. This next section, though, may be a bit of a challenge. We've all gotten to know you better tonight as the evening has gone on, but we wanted to give you, at the end of the evening, one final chance to make what we're calling an elevator pitch. So each candidate will have 30 seconds to express why they should be elected. And our rotation goes to NDP candidate Emma Norton first.
It's about choices. The NDP chooses to fight for you. We put people first, we always have, and we always will. We will choose to set and meet targets that will thwart the climate crisis. We will choose to build and support building of affordable housing. We will choose to keep the cost of living low by taking care of each other. We will choose to provide enough support for our Nova Scotia healthcare system based on our needs. You have another choice in selection. Please vote for the NDP. I'm Emma Norton, the NDP candidate for Dartmouth-Cole Harbour.
Thank you. Conservative candidate for Halifax, Bruce Holland, is next.
Thank you, Norma Lee. I think, I hope that tonight that I prove to you that I have a litany of experience from just grassroots, working in the community on the various boards and commissions and agencies, from the YWCA right through to the with the original committee that was struck to do the Halifax North Commons. You know, there's all kinds of things that I've worked on over the years, and then being in municipal government, provincial government, on and on and on, and even today still heavily involved in the community. So thank you. I'm Bruce Holland, and I'm your Conservative candidate in Halifax, and I ask for your vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Jason Cole is next, the Conservative candidate for Dartmouth-Cole Harbour.
I didn't come with notes. I didn't come with talking points. I came with me. I came because I know these issues. With affection and compassion, we can effectively do all these things that we care about need to be done in a balanced measure that respects the taxpayer, that is effective in getting all these programs and national priorities that we have to get done in a balanced and measured way. I'm Jason Cole. I'm your Conservative candidate for Dartmouth-Cole Harbour, and I will do a fantastic job for you as your representative. Thank you.
The Green Party candidate for Halifax, Joanne Roberts, is next.
Thanks, Normally. You know, I had a choice too about whether to run for office. And I have made that choice because I believe, first of all, we need more women's voices in the House of Commons. 47% of our candidates are women with the Green Party. And I'm going to ask you tonight to, if you're a parent, vote the way your kids want you to vote, because you'll vote green. And the rest of you, I ask you to vote as if your life depended on it, because it does. I'm Joanne Roberts, and I ask for your vote in Halifax.
Next to Green Party candidate for Dartmouth-Cole Harbour, Lil MacPherson.
I guess we're allowed to brag, aren't we, about things we've done. So I was one of the first 200 Canadians trained by the Al Gore team in Canada. And I've been doing this for over 10 years, and I'm now the Atlantic mentor for the Canadian Climate Project Canada. I've also won Business Person of the Year in the Halifax Chamber of Commerce. So I'm all about business, but I want to go back to the youth. Every time I've done a presentation, I've done over 300 presentations all over Nova Scotia. Universities, schools, non-government, government, the whole works. It's the youth that gets me the most. They come up to me after, and they're filled with because I present on crisis and solutions. And they come up to me with this fear and kind of hope in their eyes, like, oh God, what are you gonna do? You gonna do something? What are we gonna do? And they're scared. That's my motivation right there.
Have to stop.
I'm Lil MacPherson. I'd like for your support.
Thank you. Andy Fillmore is next, the Liberal candidate for Halifax.
Well, thank you. In 2015, I made a promise to voters in this city that if you sent me to Ottawa, I'd be a champion for Halifax. And that's what I've done over the last 4 years. We've tripled federal investments in our city, going from the very bottom of the barrel, where the Conservative government put us, to the 8th most invested federal riding in the country in just 4 years. And you can see the impact on our city every single day, and that's the record that I'm running on. This October, we have a choice to make, to keep building on that progress or go back to the politics and the neglect of the Harper years. I'm Andy Fillmore, I'm the Liberal candidate in Halifax, and together, let's choose forward. Thank you very much.
And next, Darren Fisher, the Liberal candidate in Dartmouth-Cole Harbour.
Thank you so much. I believe in bringing common sense and compassion back to government. I am not adversarial. I'm not hyper-partisan. I build relationships, and I have the ability to work across party lines with MLAs, councillors, deputy mayor, mayors, other MPs. I have advocated for investments that our community needs to succeed. As you've heard me say, there's never been a better time to live in Dartmouth-Cole Harbour. My name is Darren Fisher, and I ask you to kindly send me back to Ottawa with your vote on October 21st. Thank you.
Thank you. So we've come to the end of our evening. So on behalf of all the partners who presented this forum, thank you so much for coming out this evening. And of course, thank you to all of the candidates for participating. We'll do their names one more time. Bruce Holland, Halifax, the Conservative Party of Canada. Jason Cole, Dartmouth-Cole Harbour, Conservative Party of Canada. Joanne Roberts, Halifax, Green Party of Canada. Lil MacPherson, Dartmouth-Cole Harbour, Green Party of Canada. Andy Fillmore, Halifax, Liberal Party of Canada. Darren Fisher, Dartmouth-Cole Harbour, Liberal Party of Canada. And Emma Norton, Dartmouth-Cole Harbour, for the NDP. Thank you so much. Good night. And of course, vote on October 21st.